Virgil's time is in the 1st century BCE. His dates are 70 to 19 in the 1st century before the Common Era. He lives through very interesting times. Tumultuous is not even enough of an accurate word to describe it. The Roman Empire that we see here is now emerging into historical time. It is this massive, massive conglomeration of many different nations, many different groups that Rome has brought under its sway. And the Romans are rightfully amazed at their own powers now. They are top dog in the Mediterranean. Others had been, but no one had quite done it as well as the Romans did. And now they're going to have this position as this centerpiece of this giant empire. And what does it mean now to be here, to be in this position? It means a couple of different things. Number one, you've got a militaristic side to your cultural background. The Romans are obviously justly proud of their military capability. It also means, though, if you've lived through the previous century along with Virgil, that you're a fratricidal group. You've seen lots of awful civil wars as those who were in positions of power turned their sights on each other, brought nasty, awful wars of Romans against Romans, trying to figure out who's going to be the maximum leader of this new imperial structure. You've seen a dissolution of a past way of being. The Roman Republic is now gone. And that's a frightening new world. Where do we exist and where do we fit in all this, we Romans? It seems like really important hunks of what it is to be Roman are now all up for grabs. And it's very difficult for people to figure out what comes next. Along comes a figure named Augustus. Augustus rules Rome as the first emperor, proclaiming himself to be carrying forward old traditions, but what he's really doing is entirely remaking things. Realizes now in this time of great tumult that Rome needs a new sense of itself. He also has great respect for the importance of the arts. He nurtures and supports poets, Virgil among them. Coming after this time of great tumult, Augustus realizes and puts his finger on the need to have a new sense of what it is to be Roman. Virgil shares that view and says that yes, indeed, we do need to have a sense of what it is to be Roman, and undertakes the project of building this through this mythic form of epic poetry on Homeric and other precedents, and trying to give in this form some strong sense of what this identity is going to be. And it's true, the project that Virgil has in his poetic form works in tandem with a political project that Augustus has of building a new sense of what Rome is all about. Now, there are many histories to Rome, lots of different ways of looking back into the past to figure out where Rome came from and what it's all about. Aeneas is someone that we've met before. We see him in Homer's epics. He shows up in the Iliad as an important Trojan hero. He's not the most important by any means, but he's an important Trojan hero. And in the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, we have some connection with Aeneas. Actually, he shows up there. He's born when Zeus is fed up with Aphrodite's mischievousness and making gods fall in love with mortals, and he makes it happen to Aphrodite. Now, the background that we have in this early past, in the Homeric story of the Iliad and then in the Homeric hymns, is of a character who's not exactly warmly embraced. Aphrodite's a little embarrassed now. She falls in love with a mortal person, Anchises, and the two of them now produce Aeneas, who has immortal blood, but it's kind of a revenge against Aphrodite for having her weaken all those immortals by making them fall in love with mortals. Well, the same thing now happens to her. So Aeneas then is born of a goddess. He has divine blood in him. That doesn't make him alone among the ancient mortal heroes, but it surely makes him pretty grand. That background early Romans start to hang on to. Back to at least the 3rd century BCE, they start talking about Aeneas as being a founder of Rome, a founding figure of this city. There are also other well-known stories of Rome's past, as some of you all will recognize the famous statue of Romulus and Remus from the Capitoline Hill in ancient Rome. Romulus and Remus were understood to be founders of the city of Rome back in the 8th century BCE. That legend has a rich collection of tales around it. The Romans believe that that's the case. They understand their city to come from this pair of twins. There's a little bit of a problem with this vector in their history, though, because as you all will know, Rome is founded when Romulus kills Remus. We've got brothers literally killing each other, so Rome is founded on an act of fratricide. It would be like people looking back to your own national consciousness and national identity and talking about founding figures of the nation killing each other, and then the nation begins. That's a little bit of a complicated history, especially given Rome's recent past at the time Virgil's writing, and so that's not the one he really latches onto. Instead, this figure Aeneas returns for him. Then there are names in the past, Rome's that show up behind Rome. A first settlement of Lavinium shows up in the legends that surround Rome. Also, the city Alba Longa, an important ancient settlement that sends a colony out to found Rome. We hear of Latium, an ancient civilization. These are all terms that kind of are reverberating around, and before Virgil didn't have quite a solidified, authoritative narrative that strung them all together. Well, Virgil does that. Remember what we talked about with Hesiod, lining up all the different possibilities of divine relationships with one another through genealogical chart. He makes sense out of this past history. Well, Virgil's doing the same thing, taking lots of different tales and weaving them together with Aeneas now as the most important one. Now, wherever it came from, though, it was clear among those who were living at the time that Rome was the undisputed power in the ancient Mediterranean. Augustus sat as founder of a massive and massively successful empire. Virgil's going to now try to take up this project, constructing a good past for what this empire is all about. And that's for him going to mean a turn to antiquity, a turn to bury himself inside of this legend around Aeneas and look for a Trojan background to what it is to be Roman. Now, what do the Romans get by having Trojanness in their background? Well, they surely get a sense of antiquity that's built into them. No question about that. The Trojans are very old. They've been around for a long time. This great past now gets to be the lineage of the city of Rome. Now, historically, is it accurate to say that such a linkage exists? That's probably not true. It's probably not the case. The Romans thought it was even before Virgil, but it's probably not true that we're going to find some biological linkage between ancient Trojans and the Roman site. Instead, what we have is an affiliation, a kind of chosen affiliation that Virgil develops and works into the sense of background of what Greekness is, or what Romanness is going to be all about. So they get an anchor in the great past by linking to the Romans. They also get something else. They get a position that is not swallowed up by the Greeks. The Romans don't want to claim that they come from the Greeks. That's not a palatable kind of linkage for them to make, so there's no legend that talks about biological background, some founding figure in the Greek material that would lead up to them. And instead, interestingly, they choose their background to lead back to Greeks' sworn enemies, these Trojans. And the Trojans are, after all, somewhat admirable, of course. They're great people to look at. We learn about these great figures, Hector and Aeneas and all the others. On the other hand, they're losers, aren't they? Sorry, it's a harsh way to say that, but the Trojans don't win the Trojan War. So are the Romans now affiliating themselves with a culture that is shown itself in history to be someone that is not able to win a grand victory against the Greeks? Well, not quite. Virgil's going to talk about a story that, sure, talks about an early loss, but Rome's position now at the time Virgil is writing is undisputed. There's no question about them having any pesky Greeks around to bother them anymore. The Romans had crushed them in the century before Virgil. So there's confidence that shows militarily with respect to Greece. But there's an ongoing sense among the Romans of cultural anxiety with respect to Greek greatness. A famous line from a great Roman poet, Horace, in one of his epistles, talks about Graecia capta ferum victorum capit, which means Greece, after it was captured the ferocious victor. So after the Romans clobber the Greeks militarily, the Romans fall for lots of Greek culture. They get excited by it, and there's a lot of interest in Greekness from the Roman side of things. Well, that cultural anxiety, I think, is getting worked out by making a connection with a grand past that Homer talks about, but affiliating with the other side, the non-Greek side, in fact, sworn enemies of the Greeks. This is perfectly fine for the Romans and makes them, I think, feel perfectly comfortable. The sense of Roman and Greek connection could maybe be mapped onto a contemporary situation. As an American, I know, at least I observe among some of my countrymen, that there's a great admiration for things that happen in older cultures, where we admire what happens in European nations. We admire the history and background that shows up in our friends across the pond, those from England in particular, and we admire that, but at the same time feel a bit culturally anxious about it. These people over there from those older cultures, they seem to be more sophisticated than we Americans are, and on occasion there'll be some resentment that bubbles up from folks that are just not quite ready to say, yes, they're culturally superior to us, but there's a kind of chip on the shoulder that shows up sometimes. In the same way, I think Romans showed a little bit of that. Now, neither of these, I think, has much basis in reality. This is just people's fantasies and not so much something that a person could argue for, but I just would notice that such a thing happens not only in contemporary America, but it's also going to happen in ancient Rome on occasion as well. Now, the background that we're going to see, the historical background, there are links to these families, Trojan families, that Roman families are trying to draw. I told you from the 3rd century BCE and forward, the Romans drew links to Aeneas and talked about him as a founder of Rome. That started a kind of cottage industry for Roman aristocrats to find Trojan linkages for themselves. In that same way that, my people, sometimes contemporary Americans, will try to find coats of arms in their family background or linkages to grand, usually European, aristocrats of centuries past. That was the same kind of impulse was showing in Rome to find and calibrate these connections with this ancient Trojan past that they found themselves linked to. Now, all of this is the stew, the cultural stew into which Virgil is entering when he tells a story, a definitive story that, yes, indeed, you Romans did come from those Trojans, and in fact, this figure of Aeneas is going to go from being one among many Trojans to being a major Trojan, and not only that, he's going to be founder of our whole national identity. You and me as classical Romans now are going to watch Virgil use Aeneas to produce a sense of who we are.